Tom Bogert, David Goss at SoccerWise. It is time to talk about the Purple Lions, Orlando City. We're going to do our segment coming up with Michael, one of the hosts of the Orlando Lions Den podcast, a New York Mets fan living out in Colorado currently. Let's go Mets. It is shocking I didn't get that in the NYCFC conversation, so I had to do the business here just to make sure I get that one across. They do an awesome job covering this team. And Tom, I think fairly there's some excitement about this club. They've let Faku Torres go. They sold him, as was sort of the time, but it seems like they've covered themselves pretty well, and there's a lot of potential in this roster.
Yeah, there was a lot of questions going into this offseason. Again, the Facundo Torres deal was coming together pretty early, and you knew that they were going to bring in a DP winger, and that ends up being Marcel Pasalic, a Croatian international coming from the Croatian League. He looks really good. I've talked to people at other clubs who have been like, yeah, he's really good. And that's always a sign for me that it's not just coming from the team who signs the player, who obviously loves him. So I always like to hear that. They also made a really surprising move to bring in Edward Atuesta. I really, really like that. Like we said on our watchability rankings pod, like he both really improves the watchability for this team, but also gives them more questions in defensive transition than with Wilder Cartagena. So for the neutral, that's going to be super fun. I don't doubt that Oscar Pereira is going to figure out a way to make sure that there's enough engine in this team, because that's how Oscar Pereira operates his team. So I'm very excited about this team, and I had more questions about them going into the offseason than I think coming out.
There's a different reality for Orlando the last 3 years than what their time was in Major League Soccer. Like, they hit the scene and it was like, this is one of the really fun teams in MLS. They struggle to be competitive every single year. Nani helped turn things around. Oscar Pereira has been the real big piece. Tom, do you feel like it's the year? Like, do you feel like there's a level of pressure different? They won the U.S. Open Cup, first trophy in club history. They made the first postseason. They won the first postseason game. Last year finished oddly. It was in Eastern Conference Finals for the first time, but home against Red Bulls felt winnable. They didn't. Like, what's the feeling around Oscar Pereira, Luis Muzzi, and the whole structure for this club?
Yeah, I mean, the infrastructure of Muzzi, Ricardo Moreira, and Oscar Pereira is really, really strong. And I'll say, I saw some fans saying, like, oh, like, is this the ceiling? Have we reached it with this kind of triumvirate? And I think I'd take a step back and say, I take your last 3-4 years. How many teams in MLS would kill for that?
Yeah.
A lot of them. So they were all disappointed that they didn't get to MLS Cup. They thought everything shook out right. They were playing really well by the end of the season, and the 3 seeds ahead of them all got eliminated, so they got to host the conference final.
Yeah.
So going into that game, they were obviously confident, obviously like, hey, this is a great opportunity for us. Didn't happen. They were all shattered. The locker room, everybody shattered, disappointed. But I think getting a little bit of time since the playoff exit is like, man, we got to a conference final. Like you said, Goss, a couple years ago, they won an Open Cup. Before this trio took over, they didn't make the playoffs once. So be careful what you wish for. The grass isn't always greener. I think that this has been extremely successful in this era, and I'd be very, very hesitant to breaking it up.
Is Marco Pasalic and the talent on the team the fair replacement? Like, I think it's unfair to say Marco Pasalic is a Facundo Torres replacement because the numbers are different, right? They're not in the exact same reality. They already had Ojeda. They've obviously spent on Luis Muriel. Like, is this a team that is pushing for that next level?
Yeah, I mean, they know they're in win now mode, right? Like, that was why, again, Luis Muriel didn't work out last year, but that's why you sign a guy like that. That's a win now type move. Marco Pasalic coming in, he's like 24 years old.
Yep.
Croatia international. Again, Facundo Torres had a really big pedigree and talent already, but part of that transfer was potential. And yes, Marco Pasalic can improve. Yes, there is going to be resale value in a few years if that's the route they go, if he doesn't stay here for a decade. But this is more of a finished product than what Facundo Torres is when he came. Martin Ojeda was along that line as well. Like, he's in his prime right now. Ramiro Enrique is him and Duncan McGuire are hitting their prime age years as well. So this is a win-now team. They know they have the talent for it. They have the roster for it. They have the coach for it, all of that. They're doing everything they can to try to give themselves as many chances as they can.
Well, I will try and get up to Orlando as much as I can this year. I did not last year. I've been a bunch of times for some big games. I guarantee I will be there for the NWSL Challenge Cup, which I believe is on March 7th. Orlando Pride, of course, the reigning champions. You mentioned that Eastern Conference Finals. That was 12 hours after their club won the NWSL Championship. I think there seems to be positive momentum under the Wolves, and the hope is that it continues this year. But for more on it, let's go to our segment with Michael. I was tempted tempted to go Andrew Wiebe and do the full Orlando. And then I was like, why would I do that? Why would I be that person? But then I brought it up anyway to make it as miserable as possible.
No.
Yes, we are talking Orlando City. We're talking the Lions Den, the purple, everything good about it. After a big season, Eastern Conference Finals appearance, and a lot to break down and a lot to dig into. We've got Mike here from the Orlando Lions Den podcast, one of the many hosts of the show. Mike, thanks for being with me.
Appreciate you having me. I'm excited to meet you and be on the show. I've been listening to Soccer Wise since you guys got it started. And I'm happy to dig into it.
It wasn't stated to me originally when we were introduced to each other and that you were a Mets fan. So now we're going to talk Pete Alonso for about 15 minutes. We'll probably pull in a little bit of we'll watch Francisco Lindor's Grand Slam. I basically wake up every morning. I watch Edwin Diaz's walkout. I watch Pete Alonso's home run against the Brewers, and I watch Francisco Lindor's Grand Slam. And then Robin Ventura's Grand Slam comes back up on YouTube, and you're like, yeah, fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go deep cut. I still love watching, some old 2000s highlights. Give me some, Mike Piazza. I used to have a Mike Piazza Way sign in my bedroom. Give me some Benny Agbayani.
Love Benny Agbayani. Mr. Hawaii himself wearing number 50, giving balls away to fans when it's not even the end of the game. No one is enjoying this besides us two. So I'm glad we were able to do that.
That's why I had to get the deep cut name in there.
Yeah. Disclaimer for everyone listening. We are recording this before the friendly against Miami, which is coming up, I think, tomorrow night as of us recording at Raymond James Stadium. We will obviously see a lot because that's going to be a more heavily watched preseason game. So some of the stuff we say might be wrong, and some of the stuff Doyle says probably is wrong. That's not my problem. I'm not disclaimering for that. He could go do that himself if he wants to. For anyone who hasn't listened to these shows before, we will run through all of the transfers. We'll talk about the offseason a bit. We'll talk about the cup competitions this team's in. We'll go into our Doyleism where we get to sit at the foot of the MLS sage and have him speak his knowledge into the world. And then we'll talk about the team off the back of that. And we will finish with our over-under line from Andrew Wiebe. This one is chaos in 15 different directions. So we'll see where that conversation takes us when we do eventually get there. Let's start out with this. For the transfer window, the density of the moves, the amount of moves, maybe not huge, but the magnitude of them is massive for this club. So on the way out, Facundo Torres, one of the biggest signings in the club's history, one of the biggest sales now in the club's history, is headed back to South America. That is the one big move of this offseason. Some other pieces as well, Felipe and players like that. Mason Stujahar traded to Salt Lake City. Luco Petrasso signing with Montreal as a free agent. Some other moves in there. But Faku Torres is the big story, Mike. And I find this fascinating because when he was brought in, it was a changing of the guard for Orlando to spend that amount of money and a changing for the league to spend that amount of money at a DP spot on a young player like that and to build a roster around him. He went on to play 3 full seasons for the club, an Eastern Conference Finals, a U.S. Open Cup victory. He finished, I believe, with over 9,000 minutes played in Major League Soccer. What is his legacy? And then what is it in the context of the way he has now left in this offseason?
So I think that a lot of us, first off, the second part of that question, when you talk about his legacy, we all are pretty cognizant over the fact that MLS is becoming a selling league more likely than we are a buying league. When you're getting these guys in who are young, we know that they're going to have aspirations to want to go elsewhere, whether it be Europe or a South American giant like Palmeiras. I think that we look at that as, we did the job for him. He did a job for us. We did the job for him. He's a club record signing on the way out. And as far as that, I feel like we're all relatively happy for him. And we felt like if we were going to make this move, now was the time to do it. Coming off of his strongest season at the age that he was at is probably the best value we were going to get. And I feel like, you kind of have to look at the terms of it and feel like we overall realistically got a pretty good deal. Now, when it comes to his legacy, I feel like with certainty, you kind of can't have a Mount Rushmore of Orlando City players that doesn't have Facundo Torres on it.
Right.
I look at our legacy, realistically, 3 players that are the locks on it. For me, starts with Kaká. He was the person who, obviously, right back here.
He's got his own scarf. Yeah, I've got one right there.
You got to see
actually.
it. We match. Yeah. You got to get rid of the Rowdies jersey though. I'm sorry, but Kaká, he's the one who put our club on the map. He's the one who made us a household name. People knew about us. People saw the purple. Kaká is important. Nani is the second name that's on there, and he's on there because he's the guy who turned the culture around. We were a perennial loser.
Right.
Even with Kaká and how great he was, we were a perennial loser. And then Nani was one of those ones who helped really kind of shift the stigma of maybe this club can be something more. And Facundo Torres was the one who got us into winning culture. Obviously, Oscar Pereira goes hand in hand with that. But as far as the player that you symbolize with that, it's Facundo Torres. And I think that's what his lasting legacy. He got us our first MLS era trophy. He's our leading goal scorer in the history of the club. Record sale in the history of the club. He's got a lot of things up towards the top. And I know a lot of people say that he's maybe was a little bit of like a PK merchant for us. I disagree with that, but it's not bad to have a guy who's rock solid on PKs. So
No, it is not a bad thing, especially if you're going to win tournaments, which is what ended up happening for Orlando City. Exactly. Is Pedro Gallese the fourth right now? If I made you carve it in stone?
I think he is for a lot of people.
Okay.
I would, because especially if it's important to note you keep it to players, because I feel like if you don't keep it to players, like Oscar Pereira is obviously on there. But yeah, I would say it's the two players that I think are most likely on there. It's either Pedro Gallese or Robin Janssen. It's one of those two that are most likely on there. I hear some arguments every once in a while for Mauricio Pereira, which I don't mind either. But I think that Pedro and Robin have the stronger resume for it.
It is very telling for what the reality of this club is that all the names we are saying are current / very recent names except for Kaká. I think it's a good reminder for people who aren't Orlando fans or newer fans to understand that there was excitement around this club from day one just because of the USL experience as well as the fan experience. Like Orlando is one of the most, I think, market relevant clubs in Major League Soccer, and they were one of the first to be that. And you went from big crowds at a football stadium to then building one of the first walls in MLS and having that entire atmosphere and all of that, which has always served the club very well and has been a reason why national teams have played there on the men's and women's side and hosted big friendlies and all-star games and all that type of stuff. But a lot of the success on the field is newer. It's why the lack of moves makes sense, but also I think it's a little worrying in like where this club is going and what the next direction is. On the not one of the outbound players, but in my notes that I had to put was a reminder that Wilder Cartagena has picked up an Achilles injury and will be out the entire season is the expectation. It is why the two biggest inbound moves are a replacement for Faku Torres and a replacement for Cartagena. As Marko Pasalic signs as the newest designated player, 5 caps for the Croatian national team, just 24 years old, coming in as a like-for-like out on the wing. And then Eddie Atuesta is the other big addition in this offseason. Was an LAFC original, got sold to play in South America, has been come back on loan with LAFC over the last year, and now a full-time addition to this Orlando team. What have you made of the work this club has done?
So first, I just want to, my slight beef is that just tell us if he's out for the season if you're putting him on SEI. Like, because there was an interview today and they said that, they're still waiting on updates. I was like, guys, he already had surgery. Like, He posted pictures of surgery.
Right.
Like, it's a ruptured Achilles from everything we saw. Like, he's done for the year. Let him rest. Like, it's okay. But I really like the Atuesta move. I will say it's important to note for our fans that he's a very different player than Wilder Cartagena is. Wilder Cartagena is much more of a bruiser. He's going to get stuck in there, whereas Atuesta is a little bit more of an 8. He wants to progress the ball, be in possession a little bit more, and get a little bit more forward. I am hoping that ends up being a positive thing. I feel like we tried to be a little bit more attacking minded at the beginning side of last year, and we had a really rough go figuring out how things were going to go. So I'm hoping that he gets in with enough time that they get it sorted, because otherwise, after Araujo and Cartagena, before Atuesta came in, our midfield depth was not great. We have Joran Gerbet, who came in from Clemson in the draft this year, and Colin Gusky, who I think just turned 18 out of OCB.
But I love his game.
He is a very good player. I know that there's a question about young player later. He could get mentioned, but maybe not. But Pasalic, to me, so Atuesta I like a lot. I hope that he continues to play his game the way that he likes to play the game, and Poppy doesn't try and make him be something that he's not. For Pasalic, already in like the first little bit of preseason action that fans actually got to see him in, he's a Poppy player. He tracks back in defense. He likes to have the ball at his feet. He's not afraid to cut in. And I will say, I think he's less afraid to shoot than Faku was. He takes a little bit more shots. My big worry is the production. Obviously, if you take a look at the Croatian league, I think it's around the 25th ranked league in the world. MLS recently was, I think Opta put us as like the 9th ranked league in the world. So it's not necessarily as high of a quality a league. And in the last 2 years, Facundo Torres had 34 goals and 10 assists in all competitions. Pasalic is coming off of 16 and 9. You know, it's a jump in competition and a jump in production. That's a big ask from someone who's going to be coming to a new country. And, you know, you've also seen this when it comes to players coming from Europe. Sometimes European players take a little bit longer to adjust in MLS. South American and players from Liga MX tend to usually adapt a little bit quicker. So I'm hopeful that he's going to be the guy. The numbers suggest that he's got big shoes to fill. And I don't know that he can, but I'm being optimistic about it. I also will say that Nicolas Rodriguez, the U22 winger from Colombia, I like him as an addition to come in as well and sit behind him and learn and be that additional guy off the bench. He looks like he's a really pacey kid. So I think he will be a fun piece to see coming in at the end of games.
Yeah, I should have added that one. That U22 move is the change in MLS, which is, and not that they're like for like, but you don't have to sign a Facundo Torres as a DP anymore. You can sign both, which is sort of the idea of what Orlando's done, is use both of these initiatives to bring players in, one for the future, and you're hoping one for the present.
As someone who is nuts about the rules in this league, last year, I don't know if you remember, because of the fact that rule didn't come into place until mid-season, we had to buy Cesar Araujo out of his U22 initiative spot to accommodate Luis Muriel coming in, and then they changed the rule mid-season. So just as someone who loves the rules so much, dude, that pissed me off so much. It's part of the language, but yeah.
Don't worry, I have a friend who still texts me about how MLS wouldn't let Seattle move Flaco Fernandez off of a DP deal in 2013, but let the Galaxy do it in 2014. So you've got 10 years of griping to get to a point in which I will probably tell you, do not bring up Flaco Fernandez again in my life. So that will be you in about 10 years. So
yeah,
got plenty of time.
I'll still remember it. I can guarantee that. I mean, then we also lost a U22 guy in the expansion draft. So, which that's just there's question marks, but I don't have enough time to really go into that because we never saw him play.
I was going to say, sometimes that move feels like they may have gotten a get out of jail free card on that pick. Although if you sign a young player, you have belief in them, but we never saw him on the field.
It's one of those things though. Like, is it a get out of jail free card if you spent $1.5 million to only get $50,000 in allocation money in return?
Fair.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. That is a very, very good point. On the two signings that we talked about, I think the Atuesta stuff is interesting. He's a different player, like you said. If you were going to try and fill the hole that you had lost with some MLS experience, on paper, it's as good as you were going to do. A guy who's been borderline best 11 in Major League Soccer, just played in the league, is oddly available because his club in Brazil had too many internationals, and so they had to get rid of him, and you got him on a good deal. A lot of that I love, but it will require a shift in midfield to accommodate him. He is an elite passer. He is not a defender. He is not a guy who covers a ton of ground and wins a lot of tackles. I think a lot of that can be okay. Some of it will fall to Cesar Araujo, and I talked about it when the move got made. I think it switches from two center mids standing next to each other to one behind and one in front a little more, where Atuesta plays higher and Araujo can cover ground behind him. And Dagger Dan, maybe he starts to come inside a little bit more from the right back spot rather than trying to stretch the field wide to be sort of a second support in that midfield. I think some of that can be okay. And on the Pasalic side, I think the question marks are very reasonable. The easy comparison is Hannes Wolf, who last year came into NYCFC and was a similar, like, Bundesliga starlet who never really made it and then came to MLS as a second opportunity, but still entering their prime. And I thought we saw great flashes from Wolf. I'm still pretty high on him. You didn't see consistency. But the one thing that's different for Orlando is what we saw from Ojeda last year means that Pasalic's role is going to be very straightforward and very simple. His role is not going to be to create the game. It's going to be take advantage of 1v1s and finish opportunities that are created for you.
Exactly.
I think that's a comfortable way to come into the league. And I actually think there's the potential of the positive, which is we started to see moments where Ojeda and Torres would run into each other, and you're going to take away that confusion inside the group. I guess in my head, he's Ivan Angulo times 500 as a potential straight line runner, field stretcher / finisher, but with the finishing part.
I will say that I do love the pace on the wings because obviously Angulo is got to be one of the fastest players in the entire league. How we managed to get multiple fast guys on the flanks in our time, because we also had Juan first, also one of the fastest guys I think we've ever seen in the league. So I do really like the pace of Pasalic and Angulo. I feel like that can end up, if we find like slower fullbacks or center backs that get drifted out of position, that's something that's going to be a big way to try and take advantage of it, is with that pace. And Ojeda getting a full year playing at the 10, I think, is going to be huge to see how he dictates the game from there.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity for him, a big role for him. A note for this team, we have to do this with every club in MLS because it's chaos and confusion. The two cup competitions for Orlando are going to be Leagues Cup and the U.S. Open Cup. 16 MLS squads playing in U.S. Open Cup, so not the full 27 that should be available, but up from the 8 that played in it last year. And of course, that is the only competition that Orlando City has ever won. I've talked about it with pretty much every fan base, every team that I've done this with that's in this. You got to look at this as one to push for and like something that's winnable. You are 2 or 3 wins away from big time home games in a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and then the potential to host a final, which we saw 2 years ago, how special that can be, how big that can be for the fan base and for the market. Let's dig into our Doyleism now, and then we'll talk off the back of that.
Sure.
I think I like this year's Orlando City team a little bit more than last year's, and it's for one big reason. The addition of Eduard Atuesta in central midfield. He's just been one of my favorite players in the league to watch over the past 7, 8 years now. His ability to conduct the game from deep, but also just add value pushing forward. Like he's kind of a playmaker, but he's also, pure orchestrator type of thing. And they lack that. If you look at the way they played last year, it was almost segmented into two halves, right? There was a deeper lying midfield and the defense, and then there was the attack. And the only time they were really combined is when one of the fullbacks, but usually the right back, Dagger Dent or Harson, usually when he was pushing forward, he was able to connect the two. So I think West is going to do that. And I think that it's going to make up for the loss of Faku Torres, who was really good in the box, but didn't do a ton else. My real concern with this group, though, is do they have the depth to compete across, hopefully 10 months, right? If you look at when the season starts in February and it ends ideally the last game of the season in December, that's a long time for a team that looks thin to me. So I'm bullish on the starting lineup, but they do need to add more quality players.
So what do you make of the depth question first?
I mean, it's something that I feel like we've kind of all been questioning, especially like before Wilder Cartagena even went down. We were saying this team needs to add 2 midfielders. Like we needed that. Obviously, getting Atuesta in is good. Gerbet looks like he actually can do a job in midfield, the rookie out of Clemson. So we do like him, but, when Faku went, we're like, okay, we don't really have many right wingers left, aside from maybe Yutaro Sakata out of the draft last year. When you look at the backup of at the 10 position, you have Martin Ojeda, and then is it going to be Luis Muriel or Nico Ladero that's going to be fitting behind him? If Ladero is playing in the midfield a little bit further back, he kind of showed last year he's not really as well versed in that position. So the spine, which has been our strength over these years, I'm a little bit worried about the depth of it, to be honest. And I will say that for me, I think one of my biggest areas of concern is goalkeeper, honestly. Like, I love Pedro Gallese, but we know that we're going to miss him for multiple games due to international duty. Yeah. And Mason Stadahar, who's our longest, reigning homegrown. If you haven't seen the story of him, his story is awesome. I recommend you go look it up. But losing him as our backup goalkeeper, who was very serviceable anytime he actually got a chance to get on the field. Now we're sitting with Javier Otero, who's another homegrown, but not really a lot of minutes. OCB, get some time there. He's done all right. But
he is a freak. He is massive.
He is gigantic. I will say that.
He's already been called into Venezuela's sort of national team.
Yeah, they're a Camp Cup kick team, their version of it. But yeah, I mean, I like him, but we haven't seen it at the highest level yet, which is where we kind of worry about losing Mason a little bit. So I wouldn't hate seeing us get a backup goalkeeper who's more of like an MLS vet for those times that Pedro's away on international duty. Also, good luck to RSL trying to contain the cannon of an arm that Mason Stadahar has. I don't know if you've ever seen him unleash a throw that goes 80 yards through the air.
And now at altitude.
Yeah. The thing's going to float.
The Todd Helton of Major League Soccer. I was on the call for the running of the wall when he made the penalty kick saves in the Open Cup previously before they went on to win it.
That was technically Grinwis. That was Grinny.
Oh, was it Adam Grinwis? Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Rochester Rhinos legend Adam Grinwis. I can't believe I just messed that up. That actually makes me so unhappy with myself. I think the depth question is fair.
Totally.
We talked about this a little bit on the show. We did our over-unders about the team. Bracalo has to hit just because of what they spent and what they went out to get. If he hits now, you've got Schlegel has a little bit of depth. You're probably still looking, like you said, for that veteran central midfielder. Basically what Felipe ended up being when they went and got him. I think that's a role you can fill over the course of the next 5 months if necessary, right? Like when you look at, and I yell at Weeby about this all the time, when he's like, well, what's the depth at center back for this team? No team has depth in most of these roles. That's not the way the rosters are built. I think if this is the starting 11 and Bracalo is the center back they thought he would be year one, and you have that pairing in front, behind that midfield, and Pasalic then can sort of fit in and find his role, it's really interesting. It takes us to, I'm going to go sort of to our over-under line. Weeby's cooking for his kids, and so he sent me like 97 things about Luis Muriel and the forward line and everything. So I turned it into this, and I think this is the interesting part of this team. There's not a team in MLS with depth at center forward. Orlando's worried about depth, and yet they have 3 potential starting center forwards on this roster. Weeby wanted us to list the top 5 goal scorers in order for this team. I wrote it down as over-under that 2.5 of these players are on this roster by the end of the year, and it was Ramiro Enrique, Duncan McGuire, and Luis Muriel. The question being, will all of these players play a role? And then if not, is the way to solve some of these problems to move one of them for the pieces that you need maybe inside the league?
Yeah. So, I mean, realistically, I think that all of them are going to play a role. So first, when it comes to Duncan McGuire, he is going to be out at least most likely from what we're understanding until mid or end of April due to shoulder surgery from him separating his shoulder at the end of the playoffs last year. So
he told me at media marketing when I asked him about it, he's like, yeah, I've done it before in my life. I knew exactly what it was. And then he played. Yeah.
That's the thing is, which first off, to divert for a second, you have to love having a guy like that on your team.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, you literally sprints to the sideline with his arm dangling, just like, pop it back in. I got to go score. I want to take a PK. Like, you have to love that kind of guy. So I'm hoping he's back on that timeline by end of April, realistically. Enrique should be the guy going forward. I expect him to be the starter, and I'm curious to see what it's going to be with him. And I'm sitting here holding a Luis Muriel card because I need your Goss theorem magic to wear off on him and for us to get more out of him. Sprinkle it. I appreciate
sprinkling it as much as I can.
But realistically, when you're saying, I think they're all going to play a role because I could see Muriel kind of slotting back to the 10 a little bit to relieve Ojeda at times. But it's going to be a lot more of the Enrique and Duncan show, I think. And you kind of said that 2.5 over under 2.5, how many are going to be here next season. I think it's going to be under.
Yeah.
And it can go one of three ways. It could be Duncan wants more playing time because Enrique's been too good, so you move Duncan. It could be Enrique's been too good, so someone wants to buy him, and he gets a big move. It's been that ownership is tired of the fact that Muriel hasn't done anything, and we use a buyout because now it's a year later, so it's half the price that it was. Like I could see all three of those things being a probability, and there's that many things that are a probability. One of them might happen. So.
I agree with you. One, I think there are ways for a lot of these pieces to play together in interesting roles. I've said it a couple times. I didn't hate the Duncan McGuire, Luis Muriel together minutes. I don't know that it's not the best role for Muriel, but like I saw some of the quality in trying to make the game from a little bit deeper. Yeah. And then you'd have McGuire you'd have Duncan like rolling to the far post, and Muriel sort of like slices that ball or hits that dipping ball to the far post, causes a little chaos for defenses. It's not what you're paying $4.5 million for, but like it can do things. So I don't hate he plays a little deeper and fills in some of those roles. I think to me, Duncan McGuire is the big one, which is just, there's not a team in MLS paying a guy $1.1 million to not start. And there's not a team that's paying a backup center forward something like that and not trying to move him, or him not saying he wants to. Now, I understand and spoke to Duncan McGuire already of he wants to be in Orlando. He's committed to it. He likes being there. I don't think it's any of that. I just think at some point it's a numbers game. And you look around and you say, Enrique's under contract still after this year. So it's a really good deal. And I think there will be teams in MLS that need goals and will be willing to give something up. Especially when you now bring in the Cashfors or Kates or whatever you want to call them. He's sort of what we're seeing with Ted Pietro and Jack McGlynn. He's a prime, option for that.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that makes you really curious, like what his perceived value would be. Like if it went GAM trade, would it be close to what Leo Campana got? If you went Cashford, is it going to be close to what Blackburn's, failed alleged purchase option might have been close to. I put all those adjectives in there because what a mess that was. But I wonder what his value would be. I would personally love to see Duncan McGuire remain in Orlando and be that guy that says, this is my club, this is my team, and take it over. But I think we're just going to have to wait and see, once he gets healthy, if he's competing for the starting job. Because I will say, I feel like it's going to be Ramiro's to start the season. But at the same time, you're paying Luis Muriel a lot of money. I also wouldn't be surprised to see if they try and find a way to make it work and get him on the field to start the season too.
Yep.
With that being said, though, Oscar Pereira has also never shied away from benching someone just because they make a lot of money. So,
no, he is Oscar Pereira is one of the best in MLS. You talked about what he's brought to this club. He's a floor raiser. He's a grinder. He's passionate. He's locked in. He's never won MLS Cup. He has talked about it many times. I have friends who have worked with him closely who bring it up as well. Like, it's not a thing he ignores. It's not a secret. It's the reason he came back to the league. It's the reason Orlando was the right role for him. It's the reason he's staying, and the club is sort of all moving in that direction. If that is the goal, and it should be, it changes also maybe some of the moves you make of like, well, what's the best long-term versus what's the immediate need? Mm-hmm. And it'll be interesting where all that falls. Dejan Joveljic just bought for $4 million. Jeremy Ebobisse traded for $1.1 million in allocation money. Those are like the two, I think, comps if you're talking about a Duncan McGuire move. The Cashford would probably be less because Joveljic just started and scored in, an MLS Cup and all of that, but also required a huge contract after St. Louis or Kansas City went and got him. And Ebobisse was a different time in MLS, but you'd think that only makes it even more. And you mentioned Leo Campana and sort of what he went and earned in a trade from New England. So a lot to think about there, a lot of interesting storylines. Either way, I think it's going to be really fun to watch this Orlando team. If you are new here, if you are listening because you're an Orlando fan, welcome. We're SoccerWise. We stream 3 to 4 times a week. We put out about 5 shows a week covering MLS and NWSL. So we have all your NWSL coverage if you are an Orlando Pride fan or anything else. If you are listening here, go listen to Orlando Lions Den podcast. It gives you great coverage of Orlando and everything else going on. And Mike, if they're in the area, there's an event that people can go to.
Yeah, so coming up on the 8th of March, so that's the first away game of the year, Hourglass Brewing in Longwood, Florida. We're doing a re-release of our beer, No Mango, No Party, with them. We're going to do a watch party for the game against NYCFC that night. So Cappy's food truck's going to be there. So if you're in Orlando local, you know Cappy's. Adam's going to be there with the food truck. No Mango, No Party is going to be there. We're going to try and get some giveaways and stuff sorted and give out some cool stuff. So come hang out. Drink good beer and enjoy the game. So
literally could not think of a better night. Could not think of anything negative there. Let me ask, is there any NYCFC rivalry anymore? Do people care that they came in the league together still?
I would say that they are still like on the rival list, but when you look at, you got the Miami, you got the Atlanta, those I think kind of took precedent. And then obviously since then there was the Red Wedding and all of that fun stuff with New York. So I feel like our other rivalries intensified. But I will say, I'm pretty sure the first home game ever in our new stadium was against NYCFC, and some fans stole a chair out of the stadium.
I've seen this.
So obviously that's something that supporters don't forget. So
you were ready to do young players. Do you want to talk Tommy Williams or Alex Freeman for a second?
I was going to say, I brought up Gusky. It is not him. Alex Freeman is the guy to watch this year.
Yeah.
Tommy Williams, I'd love to see him take a step forward. He looks like he's put on some weight and some muscle, which is awesome. But Alex Freeman, from everything that I understand, he's in line to get some minutes this year. I can't say for certain where he's at on the depth chart, but I think if we need an attacking threat at right back and we are going to move Dagger off the field, Freeman's the guy that's coming on. Absolute athletic freak. Father was a wide receiver in the NFL. He's a monster, and I cannot wait to see him actually get some minutes, because I think he's going to be one of the first, like, I say real homegrowns because Benji Michel was a homegrown, but he wasn't really from our academy fully. He's going to be the first real homegrown that I think makes a big impact for the team. Yeah,
it's there's a lot of excitement around the club. I know Oscar Pareja's kept tabs on him. I know Oscar Pareja is really high on Tommy Williams as well. I say that every year he doesn't play, and then every year I'm told super high on him still, but as you said, there are steps he needs to take to get on the field. But Freeman is a game changer already at the right back / wing back position, depending on how it's set up. It's the defending that's the question mark. But at 16 years old, at 15 years old, he already looked like a professional soccer player. As you mentioned, his dad won a Super Bowl, I think, with the Packers. So it's not bad pedigree.
And he also had, like, as a right back last year, I want to say he had like 6 or 7 goals for OCB.
Yeah.
Like on top of assists as well. Like he's a real attacking threat, not scared to take people on. And again, like I said, he's strong. He's a big kid. I want to say he's like 6'2", which is pretty big for a right back. But
No, he does not look like a right back, and he has never. It's one of the things I talk about with the academy structure now of, now you have people in the room who are adults. He would have been a 10 or a center forward 10 years ago, playing at whatever club was local and scoring a ton of goals. And then maybe at 23, a coach would have said, you're not going to play here. Pick a different position and we'll try you out there. Now you have people in the room being like, what if we make you an expert at this on top of what you're naturally great at? And my understanding is I think the OCB coach has now moved in as Oscar Pareja's assistant. And I like when clubs find that connection. One of the big issues MLS clubs have, and I think one of the issues Orlando has had, because they've had some good young talent over the last few years, is who at the first team level is focusing on those young players, continuing their development while they are first team pros trying to fight to get into the team, IDP, all that type of stuff. I think Orlando's taking the next step there. And some of the not full homegrowns is tough because they've sold players out of the academy. So, like, what are you going to do if someone offers you $1 million for a teenager? But it feels like this could be a breakthrough year. And I think that is a huge part of where is your depth. If you can get 3 homegrowns to give you legitimate minutes, it changes your roster completely and where you can spend money and all of that. So I think a lot to be excited about for Orlando fans. I cannot wait for the season to get started. I just moved to Florida, so I'm going to be heading up for some games as the year goes along and starting to get familiar with Brightline or the Highway or whatever it is in between. But thank you, Mike, for taking the time to join us, and let's do this again soon.
Sounds good. I appreciate you.